Okay, we are at the half hour. So let's begin our session. I'm Alan Hauser, your host for the session. I'll be in the background, but I'm going to hand it over now to Yutong. Thank you.
Thanks. So let's get started. So I'm Yutong. I'm a product designer at Meta. And today I'm going to be talking about defragment complex products. So as I go through the slides, please do add questions, thoughts, or anything into the chat thread. So then when we do get to the end of the talk, we'll leave some time for discussions, for questions. I would love to have more discussions at the end. So please do that as we go through the slides. Okay, before I dive into the topic, I will do a bit intro of myself and also how I got into this topic. So for the past 6 years or so, I've been working at Google and Meta. So two of the large companies worked on things like Pixel phone, Pixel watch, Meta's workplace, and also most recently working on metaverse and avatars. So for some of the organizations I've been in, there are many products and many people in some of these orgs. One of the organizations I was in was this org where we worked on 7,000 products and we had 2,000 people in the org. So you can imagine there are many projects going on all the time and also many overlaps across different projects and products. So it was a bit hard to keep up and also make sure all our experiences are cohesive. On the other hand, I've also worked in orgs where we worked on one main product, but at the same time, we have like, say, 200 people in the same org. So how that feels is more like too many chefs in the kitchen. So we are all trying to work on the same surface and also trying to make it better. But at the same time, it's hard to do because of just the size of the org. So working in these large organizations and large companies in general really feels like there are many separate lanes, but also there are many overlaps. And if teams don't really work well together, the problems with that is really we will have a lot of fragmentations, inconsistencies, and sometimes even broken flows in the experience. And that's some of the things I've been experiencing in my past years at Google and Meta. And that's kind of what lead me to think about like what other ways that we can help teams to really build more cohesive experiences. And that's why I want to talk about this topic today. So I'll give a visual example here and try to really simplify kind of the problems that we have into a UI format. So here's an example of if we have like too many teams working on one product at the same time. From a UI perspective, here we have example of 4 teams working on 2 tabs right next to each other. But because of there are so many people and so many teams trying to work on the same thing, the result is there are a lot of inconsistencies. Even though the teams are not trying to kind of do things differently, but just because of the structures and the number of people, it's always hard to actually keep things as cohesive as possible. So you can see maybe there are slight difference in the colors, in the alignment and things. And this is really kind of the simplified version of looking at UI differences. But the worst thing is really in kind of broken flows. If we look at kind of sometimes flows don't even connect. So for users, say like they are on desktop to mobile, there are also broken experiences at times. And before I dive into talk about really some of the ways that we can make that collaboration and also just like general product development better, I will talk about some of the reasons why these things happen. So first of all, why do teams build fragmented products? One of the first reason I would talk about is kind of like teams don't really see the big picture. And then we have like the story here, the story that we all know. So blind people touching the elephant. From the individual point of view, you are seeing what you are seeing or you are feeling what you are feeling. So they might think this is a snake, this is a wall, or this is a fan. But really, if we zoom out, then that's when we can see that's an elephant. But oftentimes when there are many teams trying to work on the same thing, it's actually hard to see that it's an elephant that we're trying to build. And that's sometimes the problem of like having many teams trying to build the same thing together. And then the second kind of reason why these fragmentations happen is so this problem of not connect with each other. So this story I will use here is the Tower of Babel story. For anyone who's not familiar with the story, Basically, the story is that a group of people are trying to build the tallest tower in the world, and even though they keep trying and they keep trying to build the tower, like at the end, because they don't speak the same language, the tower collapsed. So we can see here, sometimes even when teams have the same goal and can see the same picture, they still end up not being able to collaborate and work on the same thing. And some of the reason is because they don't speak the same language, they don't connect, and they don't realize how much they should be working with each other, and they are only maybe working in silo. So that's also another way of really leading to fragmented experiences. And another reason here, I think we are all more familiar with, is kind of reinventing the wheel. So things like not using the same design system, trying to rebuild a pattern that maybe another team has invented before. But teams are so busy trying to move fast, and they don't realize actually someone else in the team has already solved that problem. The most effective and consistent way is really to reuse what someone else has built. But sometimes teams don't really work well with each other, and they don't realize that they are reinventing the wheel and really leading to a lot of the unnecessary inconsistencies. So those are kind of 3 high-level reasons why these happen. And now I'm going to talk about really the main part of the talk today is, so what helps? What helps to address these problems and then try to build more cohesive and also consistent experiences? Essentially, let's just like kind of reverse the stories. So the first thing is, if the teams don't know that is an elephant, let's tell them that it is an elephant. And basically that means to paint the big picture, help teams to see what exactly are we all trying to build. And then the second one is, if teams don't know how they connect, how they should be working together, how can we help teams to identify the underlying connections and really work together to achieve something as a whole? And then last is to stop reinventing the wheel and reuse the wheels. So at last, I will talk about how can we really use design systems and then reuse like patterns more effectively. So those are the 3 main topics I want to dive into today. The first one is to show the team that it is an elephant. It is this big picture. So I guess like on this topic, I know we are all familiar with journey maps. So what about a journey map? It is usually helpful for teams to see how things connect and also think from the user perspective. But the challenge in large organizations is that there are many teams trying to create journey maps. So the result is there are many team level journey maps. And while there are connections, there are overlaps, it still doesn't paint the big picture. And what we should do on top of like the journey maps is really to consolidate into the journey maps into one big picture. And how we can do that is, what I really like to do is kind of like, first of all, on the top level, basically the organization's level, whichever is relevant still, to identify the top level jobs to be done that the products want to achieve. And from identifying these top level jobs to be done, then as an organization, we start to align on really what do we want to achieve for all of our products. And you might realize they are from like different user segments and also then contributing to the different jobs to be done. And then second is to really identify kind of the top level user journeys that help that teams need to enable in order to achieve these jobs to be done. So this is more looking at from the top level, looking down, instead of from the team level, looking at how to create user journeys. So in this way, you can start to form this larger picture of like on the org level, what do we really want to achieve? For individual teams, this is where they can start to see where does my team fit, and also what other teams are really close to the step that I'm working on. So it helps to really paint this larger picture for the individual teams to see that's how I'm contributing to the big picture. And essentially it helps the teams to see it is an elephant that we are trying to build. It is not a fang, it's not a snake. So really consolidating a lot of the team level user journeys, going into that extra step is going to helpful to create a holistic picture for the individual teams. And when we talk about like, so whose responsibility is it to do this? Oftentimes at Meta and also Google, sometimes we just have this horizontal team, foundational team, who is responsible to think about holistically of all the experiences. It is challenging sometimes for individual teams to think about this, but it is important for organizations to have someone who is really responsible to keep it holistic, and that can be the responsibility of the foundation team or the horizontal team. Now that's the first part to help everyone see that it is an elephant. So then the second part I want to talk about is around identifying connections. So as I talked about, the problem here is that even when teams have the same big picture, they still sometimes aren't able to collaborate together because they don't speak the same language or they don't realize the underlying connections. So in this section, I'm going to use an example of a team that's trying to build a suite of collaboration tools. So we can see here in the large organization, we have 6 product teams trying to work on different parts of the collaboration tool. So we have a team working on like calendar status tool, another team working on emails, then chat, video calling, and document. And last, we also have the mobile team. So oftentimes in organizations, we end up like splitting from like, here's a group of teams working on desktop, here's a group of team working on mobile. So this could be, say, an example team setup. And as much as I think like teams intuitively know there's connections between these products, it is sometimes hard to really realize how are things connected, how to actually make the most out of this collaborative effort together to build something that's really larger than what individual teams can do. So now I'm going to talk about a framework that has been helpful to help teams to really identify kind of the underlying connections, and also from a very user-centric point of view. So this framework is called MODE, and I will talk about what MODE means. So first of all, in MODE, similar to really identifying the big picture, is to identify the core user intents, basically the objectives that your users want to achieve when they come to your products. And in this context, here are a couple example user intents that users might want to achieve with this suite of work products. So for example, I want to share a work update. And when users want to do that, the products they might use might be emails, chat, or documents. Or another one can be, I want to stay informed about my work. And that might be using emails and chat. And last might be, I want to bond with my coworkers. This one's quite different from the other two, but it is one of the core user intents users might have when they come to the work collaboration tools. So that's the first part. And then the second part is to identify the different contexts, basically the different circumstances when users come to your product and they might interact with your product differently because of the different contexts. And in this example, some of the contexts might be, first of all, when I'm in the office next to my coworkers, that's one of the contexts. And another one can be when I'm working from home. So then in this case, video calling becomes a lot more important than the first one. And another context could be when I'm running between meetings. And in this case, mobile experience is more important than desktop. So you can see here, context would drive what is more relevant and how users would interact with your products differently. When we add these two things together, that's when we have a mode. So a mode is a very specific way users would want to interact with your product, given the context that they are in. Now I'll give a couple more examples to help to see how can we use that to identify really the underlying connections. So an example user intent could be, I want to write a document. So that's straightforward. That's something that people want to do. And then talking about context, a person might want to do that in completely different contexts. So the first one could be, I want to write a document on my own. And then the second one could be, I want to write a document with someone else, my coworkers, while in the office, in the same room. Or the third one could be, I want to write a document with someone, but like remotely. And what that means is then we form the different modes. So the first one is an individual deep work mode. You can see, imagine the person kind of being very deep in their work at their laptop at home, maybe. And then the second one is in-person collaboration, which might happen in the office. And last one is remote collaboration, so which is quite common now. And from these modes, we can start to see what are the different needs, what are the different opportunities and problems people might have at that different modes, and also what other tools they might be using. So this relates back to the initial kind of topic of the different teams working on different products. So we can see in the first scenario, you have the document writing team working on the document writing tool itself. And then we also have the calendar team who might be working on the do not disturb mode. So these two things on surface, they might be very different, but really looking at that mode for the user's point of view, it is so related. They want to achieve the same user intent, and these features work together to help them to really achieve their goal in a more effective way. Same thing for the other two. So in-person versus remote work. In the remote work case, the video calling team would also need to consider, so how does the document tool related to their tool? As well as like calendars, like do you connect the document into the calendar? So these are some of the ways to really make things a lot more concrete and also see the connections between these tools that may feel a bit separate originally. So to kind of like highlight some of the benefits of mode, here you can see the first thing is really to connect seemingly unrelated features. It's really by kind of like identifying the underlying connections and commonalities. Some of the tools are really trying to achieve the same user intent. It's just different context. And other benefits are to provide a focus. So you can see when we look at that comic, you can make that use case scenario very concrete. And that provides a focus for teams to really think about what does your user need and what are the problems and opportunities that can come from that specific scenario and specific kind of comic if we talk about the specific visuals. And lastly is to identify new opportunities. I think even though we can brainstorm in different ways, but like by making that scenario so specific, it really helps teams to empathize with your users and start to think about what would my user actually need in that instance. So since I really like this framework, I'll give another example just to diversify how we can use this. Another user intent here is I want to stay informed at work. So this is another kind of very common work-related user intent. And then we can look at a couple different contexts. So the first context could be, I want to stay informed about my project. And here you might be doing a video call with your teammate or chat with your teammate. And so that's kind of one of the contexts. And then second context could be, I want to stay informed about org directions. And here, maybe you just receive an email from your org leaders and you read a document. So even though you have a similar intent, the context really drives different kind of results and different solutions and tools that you use. And another example is I want to stay informed about company announcements. So in this case, it might be you watch a live Q&A or a video from really your CEO in the company. Another set of contexts, just to diversify how context might be here. The first one could be, I want to stay informed while working at my desk. So again, this is where you see yourself stationed there and you might be going through your email, chat, and trying to catch up on things. And another second one is, I want to stay informed while running between meetings. So you can see here, when you're running between meetings, mobile, again, becomes a much more important product than desktop. And last one could be, I want to stay informed after 2 weeks of PTO. So that also changes the context. Here, you might have hundreds of emails, hundreds of chat. So then the filtering feature becomes a lot more important than, say, just catching up day to day. So we can see here, for the same intent, I want to stay informed at work, you can see just 6 really different contexts, and there are many more that we can create. So the idea is really to find kind of these ways to rethink how your products are connected with one another, help teams see how they should be working together to really enable these specific instances, specific moments your user is really trying to achieve something. And also start to see really additional opportunities maybe you haven't thought about before by just looking at separate kind of user journeys or separate products. So again, just to come back to this point, the benefits of mode. So connects the seemingly unrelated features, provide focus, and also helps teams to start to identify new opportunities. So that's the second part I want to talk about, which is to identify connections. And then the third one I want to talk about is to reuse wheels. So here we can say, I think like this one is a bit more straightforward. So as designers and also UX practitioners, we all know design systems. I think design system is always very useful to help teams to really reuse components, patterns, and things. However, the problems in large organizations is everyone interprets the system quite differently. So we've had times when there are kind of baseline design system there, but also everyone's using them in ways where sometimes people add an additional header, or sometimes people use the tables in a different way. So which is not helpful. I think what I really want to talk about is kind of like for the complex organizations, how can we leverage design systems in the most effective way? And before I do that, we'll just talk about, let's look at just elements of design systems. So first of all, usually there's this foundation level, which is really the colors, typography, spacing, and things that people that really make up the foundational elements of the design system. Then we move up to look at the different components and the patterns, basically using really the foundational elements to create these different sets of things. So things like forms, buttons, or fields. And then last, I want to talk about, this is the part I really want to focus on, is kind of page templates. So from the teams I've been working on, oftentimes design systems start with more lower level of the foundational level or really the component level, but it doesn't really always go to the page template level. And I think usually it's okay for a team that has strong visual skills, if all the designers have strong visual skills, or it is more consumer-facing pages, maybe it's a bit easier to use them still in the same way. But the times when we worked on like enterprise products, when many designers cover many pages, and also different people have different level of visual skills, that's when things start to get a bit messy. And everyone uses the components and also the foundational level in quite different ways. So the page templates would become something that would be very helpful for teams to really use things in a more consistent way. And when I talk about page templates, I think it's beyond, we would like to go beyond kind of like really sharing the layouts, but also talk about what are the page templates trying to achieve for the teams. So this is why I want to talk about how to create more user intent-based page templates. So this also goes back to our last section talking about user intents. And I find it really helpful to connect from the big picture to the connections to really the design system level, thinking about how can we incorporate all the similar kind of user intent throughout the process. And here I'll talk about how to create user intent-based page templates and how they can really help teams. So first of all, it starts with auditing existing experiences, which is the same for all really design system components and patterns. And from there, it'll be helpful to abstract the different user intents from these groups. So for example, for an enterprise products, some of these common intents could be, I want to scan through all the items. And that usually implies a page with a table. Or another user intent could be, I want to see details of specific items. So this could be a details page. So when people tap on a specific item, then you see more. Or the last one can be, I want to get a high-level overview. So that could be a homepage or something that summarizes the table or the list. So you can see then we can create the page templates that correspond to each of the user intents. So again, we have the list page, we have the details page, we have overview page. And this is kind of the creation part of the design system, or like the page templates. But from the team side, for teams to really use this, it'd be helpful for them to first to also identify what are they really trying to achieve with this new page or new feature they are trying to build. And also try to see which one of the user intents most align with what they are trying to achieve. So then it's kind of a decision tree of trying to see these are the user intents that we think are quite common across products. And does your feature fit into these categories? If they do, then it's a question of like, how can we use the existing templates and then maybe configure them a little bit for the different purposes. But it really helps the teams to save some time from recreating things, especially for very complex enterprise products. This is where teams don't need to start to look at each of the foundational elements and can really try to streamline that process, the product development process, and really jump into kind of using existing wheels or existing really things instead of reinventing the wheel. Okay, so to sum up, fragmented user experiences are like puzzles with missing pieces. They are confusing and frustrating for users. So these are some of the things like I have experienced at Google and Meta, even though individual teams may have really the best intentions to build the best experiences we can from our own kind of angle and perspective. It is hard to actually try to see how things can work together, how things can be brought together. So it is important to really have very dedicated efforts to try to look at how can teams work closer, how can teams, or maybe having a separate team, a foundation team, to really help individual teams to start to see the big picture and also the connection between things, as well as reusing existing design system and components. So teams don't really need to reinvent things. And to defragment these experiences means putting the pieces back together in a way that makes sense. So that's really what I wanted to share here. The 3 different ways that we can help teams to put the puzzles together in a way that makes sense. So first of all, show the team the big picture. Where are we trying to go? What do we want to do? Is this an elephant or is this actually a snake or a fan? And then second is to identify the underlying connections. Here, it is important to go beyond really the big picture and start to help teams to understand who you need to collaborate with and what are kind of the shared user intents the teams are really trying to help users achieve together. And lastly, to reuse wheels. So here, this is both helpful to help teams to be more efficient, but at the same time also build more consistent experiences together. Thank you. Want to see if there are questions, comments, discussions. We do have some time left, so we'd love to hear anything from people. Oh, Alan, I can't hear you.
Okay, going to the cheap microphone. Do you hear me, Yutong? Okay, let's go with questions. And you hear me, correct, Yutong?
Mm-hmm, yep.
No. Oh, good, you do. Okay. So I will scan the chat for questions. From earlier in your talk, Kyle says, what common questions do you ask to establish context?
To establish different context?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so for the context, this is where it's still useful to kind of start with the user intent. I think that's the most helpful to start with. And once you have that, what I find useful is to actually just do a broad brainstorm of what are the different ways people may want to achieve the core kind of user intent they're trying to do. What it's helpful is that's a way to really go broad before we narrow down. And I think that's what I like the most about the approach is going beyond kind of the established context that we know, really thinking about where would this person be is, I think for the products I've been working on, so it's usually a lot of the work products is thinking about, is this person in the office? Is this person on their way to the office and stuff? To try to think about really the day that person goes through and think about different ways the person might experience with the product. So I think that's where I really like the process of really just think about the different ways. And then I think as a team, that's where we can start to prioritize and talk about which ones do we care about. Usually I think we'll end up with really way too many different contexts. And then kind of prioritizing would be helpful to narrow things down. Okay, wonderful. And I think your answer leads into Carla's question.
what type of research are you doing to understand common contexts?
Yeah, common context. I think so for this, a lot of this work, it will be built on top of really existing research that we might know from users' needs and users' behaviors. So for example, one of the work that we were doing was around the work collaboration tools, was we listed out, we first really went through a literature kind of review of past user research that we have done that might be from team level, different features, different products individual teams are working on, and then kind of abstract and consolidate based on past research, and then create kind of a list of based on our own also hypothesis on what things people might care about, to create a list there. And then we ran kind of cut sorting and also additional research to really help us to validate based on what we knew from past research, and see is that how users think about it. So I would say really based on kind of past research, that might be team specific research, but also kind of a bit more hypothesis kind of building in creating our own list, and then validate again, and putting things back into the research again. Yeah.
Okay, Yutong, let me break in with one of my own. So I love your ideas, your goals of sharing the big picture, identifying connections, reusing wheels. However, the organizations that you've participated in and participate in now don't necessarily have a strong reputation for cross-functional collaboration and cooperation. So,
right.
So at what level in the organization do you need support to break through the cultural issues that these activities present?
Yeah, that's super interesting. So I think I would just be specific. Maybe one of the teams I was in, basically the team I started with was we were building 7,000 enterprise products and across 2,000 people. And you can imagine, so if we don't prioritize consistency, quality, the products are going to go in completely different directions. And I would say that's where things were. Oftentimes it is when things are already out of control and we can see the quality problems. That's when our leaders they also see it, they also feel it themselves. So in multiple of the orgs I've been, it actually comes from the VPs themselves feeling like this is actually not great. And also I think it's both in quality, but also even just in efficiency. When we develop things, there's too much repetitive work, and I think that's where the reinventing the wheel problem that comes in. So, so in the org I was in, we basically pitched a horizontal team, a foundation team, to really look across all these products or different sub-pillars that we had across the 2,000 people that we had. Really think about how can we rethink this? How can we create something that's a bit more holistic, and also shared frameworks for then individual teams can pick up. So I personally was part of that effort to really both try to identify the problems and also pitch kind of a horizontal team. Similarly, in another org, so the second org I was talking about, basically 200 people working on one product, we had a similar issue, but in a different way. So there were more problems showing up on the same page, and that was definitely not good. So there are times and also I think at Meta in general, we have been called out about quality. So it is definitely top of mind from our leaders. I think that's helpful in kind of them pitching to say let's rethink this. So in a similar kind of manner in the other org, we also did pitch to say let's try to also have a foundation team who looks at the design system in more holistic ways, and also create shared frameworks and things. I think the process is probably just not linear, but because there's reputations around quality and also leaders, they start to pay attention, it does help in kind of create more focus and more urgency in then try to see going from also bottom up to say let's try to rethink this and put more effort there.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. Let's go back to the chat. Youngming says, thanks for an amazing presentation. Can you please give us an example of seeing the elephant? To the extent that you can, with confidentiality agreements and NDAs, et cetera? So,
let me think about this. So I would say, I guess I would talk about maybe the org I was in that was working on 7,000 tools. So basically the team I was in was working on the internal tools that we use at Meta. So tools like for communication, internal communication, or accounting tools, marketing tools. There's so much internally, but the problem was we had like 4 different pillars working on different parts of the experience. And what we did was really go back to do an audit of the experience. We can't really do the 7,000 audit of all the tools, but we did do kind of looking at the thematically, what are the top level themes and also user segments, and really went to team by team to understand what kind of user research they have done for different user segments, and then try to consolidate the things together. The whole process was very long, but it was helpful at the end to say, like, we have the audit of looking at these are, so beyond the pillar divisions of saying like this team works on this part of the product versus like say finance versus knowledge products, we start to see really looking from users' point of view for a person working in the company, how would they experience these different products? And that was helpful to really rethink what are we trying to build, like what is the elephant that we're trying to build? Is it, I think previously for individual team, it's more like my elephant is maybe finance tools. I only work for accounting people. I only work for knowledge products and stuff. But when we do kind of start to take a step back and looking at all the products, we start to kind of like look at maybe like really for one person, how are they experiencing our tools altogether? And then start to see connections. I think it's a bit hard to maybe explain some of the details, but hopefully that helps.
okay, wonderful. And Yang Ming also asks, when assessing the current design system, how long do you advise for the team to allocate the time working on it?
Yeah, so I think like this is definitely something that we have gone through in the past. So I would say like, I think it's in the teams I've been working at, the problems actually became very clear. It's more like because when it was almost too late, then we actually need to go back to look at things. So for example, one of the teams that we were working on was we had some very basic design system guidelines down, but the problem was like every time we can see in the product, the different designers are using them completely differently. And also designers don't really know what to use. So I think that's where like it's already clear in like maybe there are gaps and things. Then like what we did was really just like going back to each of the designers to really understand what are the common patterns or common things that they need that are missing from the products, and run like workshops to with different teams to understand their pain points. As well as like, I think thinking about like going from design to engineering, what are the other problems maybe beyond design? Like, is it implementation problem and stuff? I would say like in general, it's probably better to invest in more time to really understand the problems. But by the time we do it, I think in my past two teams was we already knew that there were a lot of problems. And then it's really trying to get into kind of what exactly is problematic. Is it because we don't have enough components? Is it because our designers don't really understand how to use them? Or is it because like our kind of handoff process from design to engineering is broken? And then like really list out really all these kind of problems and rank them by like the impact and versus like effort to change and build, and then focus on the things that would drive the most impact.
Okay, wonderful, Yutong. Thank you. And I love this one from Justina. How do you ensure consistency in designs across different teams within one company which work on a variety of web and mobile products? How do you do so beyond a design system? And it brings to mind the studies. I remember Brad Frost published one that identified more than 200 button styles at a major bank. You know, how do you bring the organization together beyond just establishing a design system?
Yeah, this is definitely a tricky one. I think like for like at Meta, for example, there are what different design systems for each of the products really. And like even the products I work on, which no consumer sees, is like internal products. We also have our own design system, which is crazy. So like we have all different types. Like one example I would give is 2 years ago, I was working on rethinking the navigation for internal products. But it just happened that we have other parts of the company, multiple teams also trying to rethink their navigation bar. So what we did was really organizing kind of weekly share outs to talk about where each teams are and also share kind of posts and articles. When we do user research, each of us would like share kind of learnings with each other. And to try to see like where do we want to align versus where we don't want to align. So a lot of the discussions was really talking about the different needs or like different kind of user contexts and stuff across the different products, and then try to see what can we leverage. I think at the end we were able to really reuse a lot of the things that we, at least like from kind of a general direction point of view, we were able to align on things. But from the details, like say the icons and things, they might be quite different for like different just visual styles within each of the products. I think like from just like working at Meta, it's mostly just like discussions and like collaborations to understand like where can we draw inspirations from each other's work and where should we still like diverge. I think also the diverging points are also quite interesting to really focus on seeing like how would maybe products that are in consumer space versus enterprise should differ and stuff.
Okay, wonderful. I think that leads into the next question from Wan Si. When improving design systems, do you work with individual design teams to figure out what they want? Okay, so gathering requirements. And what do you do when different design teams want very different things? So when you have stakeholders with conflicting requirements.
Yeah, that's always tricky for like design systems. One of the things I did was like to do weekly kind of office hours, and then like a lot of individual team designers, they would come to the office hours and really share like the things they are working on. And I think through the office hours, it was really helpful to start to see kind of similarities, which individual designers wouldn't have realized like on their own, or like I wouldn't have known if I haven't seen different kind of patterns or different things that are coming up. So the office hour was helpful to first like to really do the initial kind of understanding work. The other things is like, I guess like doing really audits and talking to each of the teams on their roadmaps, like what they are planning for upcoming things, what are the patterns they think they might need, and try to see like what are the most common needs across teams, and then prioritize that. I think like as a central team, we would try to see like what's most useful to spend our time on. And usually that's kind of like the things that multiple teams would need. So if only one team needs some of the things, we may advise them to say like, you can work on that on your own with our guidance. So then we can make sure that component or that pattern still fits in the broader design system. And then when different teams have different kind of competing, I guess like different requests, that's where it'd be helpful to really bring the teams together. Sometimes we do have like, I think like, or maybe it's also like the individual teams, they don't really realize like the differences, but only from the design system point of view. And I think that's where like sometimes we would just like try to see, does it make sense to create another configuration of the component, or does it make sense to say like, actually we should add a bit more guidelines or like strict guidelines to say like you can only use it this way. But mostly I think it'll be just like a discussion and like trying to figure out like where's a middle point that we should all proceed with.
Okay, wonderful. We have about a minute left, but we can go over just a little bit. So if you would like to stick around, Yutong, of course, it's your decision. But we have several good questions in the queue. Let me see. Okay, so this one from Laura. So we talked about implementing these ideas in the face of organizational culture, and Yutong, you mentioned that the buy-in comes from the top when they see the results of ineffective systems. Laura asks, how do you get top-level leaders in the company to understand the process as you described? A lot of times this is where it's broken. And so do you have to communicate to top level leaders what the process is, or do you get marching orders of fix it, we trust you in your implementations?
I think it's been different from like the different maybe orgs and leaders. Like we've had times where I think like we probably spend most time with the leaders in like trying to summarize the problems to them, like to say these are the top problems and these are maybe on the high level that we are thinking about the solutions that we can pursue. But like when it gets into actually implementing, sometimes it's a new process, sometimes it's like resources to actually build the components and things. I think there are leaders who have been more hands-on. I would say like we've had like leaders who, and I think in general also some of the leaders, they have been more hands-on in like trying to ensure quality. So it'll be more of a top-down kind of ask, like to say like everyone needs to follow this process, or everyone needs to like use go through certain reviews, or like or use the same framework and stuff. But we've also had times when the leadership support is more helping us with like the resources. So once they understand the need and also trust us in like how we are thinking about it, it's more providing like say eng resource or design resource to actually form a team to do this. But the actual, I guess, like operationalizing the work is still based on the teams to do that. I think oftentimes for some of these teams, we have like a specific role, like say a design program manager, who would always help us to really operationalize some of the things and also communicating out to the orgs. But kind of with sometimes with implicit or sometimes with explicit kind of like buy-ins and like mandates from like leaders.
Okay, wonderful. We just have a few more questions. Once he asks, you mentioned that many teams are busy and not aware of other teams that might have created the same things in different forms. When you have a design team that works, how do you onboard teams that don't necessarily see the value in it? Maybe they're happy with what they're currently using, and the new design system will just require that they do a lot more work than they're willing to exert now. How do you address that idea?
Yeah, I think there are definitely times when like some teams feel it's faster to do their own thing because they have been doing it this way. Some teams feel like it's better to use maybe what others have established. I think like this is maybe, it really depends on kind of, again, maybe there are times when it becomes top down to say like for consistency, for just like overall process and things, we should be using the same thing, which would make things easier. But at the same time, I think like the other approach is really just helping the teams to learn the tools, learn the process and things. I feel like the times when I work with individual teams, designers, usually people use things in different ways because they didn't spend enough, I guess like investing the initial time to really see how the established system or the tools can really save them time. So I've like organized like say tip-centric sessions with teams to really share like how like the things we establish is really meant to save you time. I think like that's important to really help them to see like we're not trying to, it is for common goods, and like, but the initial, I think the onboarding is definitely important. Really go through the resources that we have, and sometimes maybe it's a Figma library, sometimes it's maybe like how do you hand off to engineers different tools, and really helps them to see like once you onboard to these, like how much time you can save and be more efficient in your work. I think the initial education is where like it's oftentimes not the thing that we prioritize, but probably we can benefit from like really prioritizing that.
Okay, wonderful. Just maybe two more. So Paul says, and Paul, I'm not sure if you're responding to another question in the chat or if this is for Yutong. Let me raise it to Yutong. Is the solution to go beyond a design system, as the question implies, or is it to expand the scope of the design system with appropriate rules? Paul says, yeah, it's a response to the earlier question. So unless you want to elaborate, Yutong?
So I guess like for this one, it's, I think maybe, let me just like read it. I would say in general, I'm promoting more like really expand the design system and trying to see how can we make the most use out of it, and try to adapt it, I guess, for different size of the teams. I think oftentimes design system, again, is where it starts with more the foundation level and also component level, but really the patterns and the page layouts and things are things that are left out. So I would say like this is very specifically fit for maybe like complex like enterprise products. I think there's a lot that like teams can really benefit from by expanding and also building on top of the existing design systems and really help teams to be more efficient in their work.
Okay, wonderful. And I think our last question, Christine asks, do you have any advice for a team that's in the process of developing a design system, but still has to release features in legacy or existing libraries? You can't, the heart surgeon, there's some metaphor that the auto mechanic can shut down the engine, but the heart surgeon cannot. So.
Yeah, it's so tricky. Like we've definitely had times when like we were building new things while building, changing the design system. I think like probably the chaos in between is hard to avoid. But like what I always like about thinking about like design system is kind of we are trying to make the paths people are already working on like to be more officialized. So really trying to see where people are already doing and then kind of building on top of what they're doing. And so then like maybe try to minimize kind of the change teams would have to do like later. And also trying to see, I think like this is definitely a balance also between like try to make very significant changes versus incremental changes. But in general, I think when we were running into that problem, we tried to see like, what do we really need to change versus like things that can stay the same for a while. So then we can minimize some of the changes in the short term.
Okay. I think we should close the session here. Thank you, Yutong, for staying over and taking so many questions, so many good, insightful questions. So at 1:30, our next set of sessions begins. And I want to thank Yutong for this wonderful presentation. And I want to thank the audience for participating. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy Convey UX. Thanks, Yutong.
Yeah, thank you.